Johann Wolfgang von Goethe remains one of the most influential figures in world literature, philosophy, and science. His works transcend their historical period, continuing to shape literary and intellectual traditions across cultures. Goethe's versatility as a writer, poet, playwright, scientist, and statesman marks him as a polymath whose contributions extend far beyond literature. His ideas and artistic creations have left an indelible imprint on the Romantic and classical movements, inspiring countless writers, philosophers, and thinkers. Even today, his work is studied not only for its literary excellence, but also for its deep engagement with the human condition. Goethe's influence is particularly significant in the development of German literature and thought. Alongside Friedrich Schiller, he played a key role in establishing Weimar Classicism, a movement that sought to balance artistic beauty with intellectual depth. His works engage with timeless themes such as love, fate, ambition, and the pursuit of knowledge, ideas that continue to resonate with readers. More than just a literary figure, Goethe was deeply involved in the political and intellectual life of his time, participating in court affairs and scientific inquiries that expanded beyond the realm of poetry and drama. His writings reflect an unparalleled engagement with both the inner world of human emotions and the outer world of scientific exploration. One of Goethe's most defining characteristics as a writer was his ability to evolve throughout his career. His early works, such as The Sorrows of Young Werther, reflected the passionate emotionalism of the Sturm und Drang, storm and stress, movement, which rebelled against Enlightenment rationalism. However, his later works, especially those influenced by his Italian journey and classical philosophy, show a transition toward a more structured and harmonious aesthetic. This intellectual and artistic transformation makes Goethe a unique figure who bridges different literary and philosophical traditions. Among his most celebrated achievements is Faust, a monumental work that took more than 60 years to complete. In this dramatic masterpiece, Goethe explores themes of ambition, knowledge, and redemption through the legendary character of Dr. Faust, a scholar who makes a pact with Mephistopheles, the devil. Faust is not only a literary triumph, but also a profound philosophical exploration of human striving and the limits of reason. The work's depth and complexity ensure its continued relevance, as scholars and artists alike find new meanings in its pages. Beyond literature, Goethe was an avid scientist who made significant contributions to various fields, including botany, optics, and anatomy. His theory of colors challenged Newton's views on light and color, advocating for a more holistic approach to scientific inquiry. Although his scientific theories were not always accepted in his time, they demonstrated his relentless curiosity and willingness to question dominant paradigms. His work in morphology and plant metamorphosis laid the foundation for later biological studies, influencing thinkers such as Charles Darwin. Goethe's impact also extended into philosophy. He was a major influence on thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, Carl Jung, and Rudolf Steiner. His ideas about individuality, creativity, and the organic development of life resonated with Romantic and later existentialist philosophers. Nietzsche, in particular, admired Goethe for his ability to embrace life in all its complexity, seeing him as a model of the Dionysian spirit that celebrates both reason and passion. Carl Jung drew upon Goethe's works in developing his theories of archetypes and the collective unconscious, especially in his interpretation of Faust. Furthermore, Goethe's life and works inspired generations of writers and artists, both in Germany and abroad. His influence can be seen in the works of Romantic poets such as Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley, who admired his imaginative depth and philosophical richness. In the 19th and 20th centuries, his writings continued to shape literary modernism and existential thought. Even today, his works are frequently adapted into films, operas, and theatrical productions, demonstrating their enduring relevance. Goethe's ability to merge literature, science, and philosophy into a cohesive intellectual vision makes him a singular figure in Western thought. His approach to life was one of continuous learning and self-improvement, a philosophy that he called Bildung, or self-cultivation. This idea, which emphasizes personal growth through experience and knowledge, remains an essential concept in modern educational philosophy and cultural discourse. His belief that art and science should not be seen as separate disciplines, but rather as complementary ways of understanding the world, continues to influence interdisciplinary approaches in contemporary academia. As we explore Goethe's life and works in this dissertation, it is essential to recognize the breadth of his achievements. Each stage of his career reflects a different phase of intellectual development, from his passionate youth to his mature engagement with classical philosophy and scientific inquiry. By examining his literary, scientific, and philosophical contributions, we gain a deeper understanding of how one individual's intellectual pursuits can shape multiple fields of human knowledge. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was born on August 28, 1749, in Frankfurt am Main, a free imperial city of the Holy Roman Empire. His family was well-established and financially secure, allowing him access to a privileged education. His father, Johann Caspar Goethe, was a respected lawyer and imperial counselor, while his mother, Katharina Elizabeth Goethe, was known for her intelligence and warm personality. From an early age, Goethe was exposed to literature, music, and the arts, shaping his intellectual curiosity and creative abilities. This early exposure played a crucial role in developing his broad and versatile interests, which would later define his career. Goethe's father was a strict and disciplined man who oversaw his son's education personally. He ensured that young Goethe studied various subjects, including Latin, Greek, French, and Italian, as well as mathematics and history. Goethe's early education was comprehensive, aiming to prepare him for a successful career, most likely in law. However, his passion for literature and poetry often took precedence over his formal studies. Even as a child, Goethe displayed an extraordinary talent for storytelling and language, writing poems and plays that showcased his innate creativity. One of the most significant influences on Goethe's early intellectual development was the cultural and literary environment of Frankfurt. The city was a hub of intellectual activity, home to various thinkers, poets, and scholars. The presence of the Frankfurt Book Fair, one of the oldest and most significant book markets in Europe, provided Goethe access to a wide range of literary works. Through his readings, he became acquainted with classical literature, medieval romances, and contemporary Enlightenment thought. This diverse exposure laid the foundation for his lifelong engagement with literature and philosophy. At the age of 16, Goethe left Frankfurt to study law at the University of Leipzig, following his father's wishes. Leipzig, often referred to as Little Paris due to its vibrant cultural scene, provided him with new intellectual and artistic experiences. While his legal studies were rigorous, Goethe was far more interested in literature, poetry, and the arts. He attended theatrical performances, engaged with literary circles, and studied under the poet Christian Fürchtegott Gellert, who encouraged his literary ambitions. During this time, Goethe also developed an appreciation for classical aesthetics, which would later shape his artistic principles. Goethe's years in Leipzig were not without challenges. He suffered from a severe illness that forced him to return home to Frankfurt in 1768. This period of illness and recovery became a time of deep reflection, during which he immersed himself in mystical and religious writings. He explored the works of Paracelsus and other alchemists, which ignited his fascination with metaphysics and the mysteries of nature. This interest in the symbolic and the metaphysical would later influence his scientific inquiries and literary themes, particularly in Faust. After recovering, Goethe resumed his studies at the University of Strasbourg in 1770, where he completed his legal education. Strasbourg proved to be a transformative environment for him, as it was there that he encountered Johann Gottfried Herder, a philosopher and literary theorist who became a major influence on his intellectual development. Herder introduced Goethe to the ideas of folk poetry, national identity, and the power of organic artistic expression. He encouraged Goethe to look beyond rigid classical forms and embrace the raw emotional depth found in popular and medieval poetry. This encounter played a decisive role in Goethe's shift toward the Sturm und Drang, storm and stress, literary movement, which emphasized intense emotion and individual genius. During his time in Strasbourg, Goethe also developed a deep admiration for Gothic architecture, particularly the Strasbourg Cathedral. He viewed the cathedral not just as a monumental structure, but as a living expression of artistic spirit and human creativity. This appreciation for medieval aesthetics contrasted with the classical ideals he had encountered in Leipzig, leading to a more nuanced and evolving artistic vision. This duality between classical restraint and romantic emotionalism would characterize much of his later work, making him a unique figure in literary history. Another defining aspect of Goethe's time in Strasbourg was his love affair with Friederike Bryan, the daughter of a pastor from the nearby village of Sessenheim. Their relationship was short-lived, but deeply influential in his early poetry. Friederike inspired many of his romantic verses, and their love affair contributed to his understanding of human emotions and relationships. The themes of passion, longing, and heartbreak that permeate his early works, particularly in the sorrows of young Werther, can be traced back to this period. Upon completing his legal studies in 1771, Goethe returned to Frankfurt, where he briefly practiced law. However, his passion for literature overshadowed his interest in legal work. During this time, he began writing his earliest major works, including Goethe von Berlichingen, a historical drama that embraced the ideals of the Sturm und Drang movement. This play, based on the life of a rebellious medieval knight, was a powerful statement against rigid social structures and classical literary constraints. It gained Goethe recognition and established him as a leading voice in the new literary movement. Goethe's early years were a period of exploration, intellectual growth, and artistic awakening. His diverse influences, from classical literature to folk poetry, from Gothic architecture to philosophical discourse, shaped him into a writer who could seamlessly blend different traditions into his work. His formal education in law was ultimately secondary to his literary calling, but it provided him with a disciplined approach to inquiry and analysis that he would later apply to his writing and scientific studies. This period laid the groundwork for his future achievements, setting him on the path to becoming one of the most celebrated figures in world literature. The emergence of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe as a literary figure coincided with the rise of the Sturm und Drang, storm and stress, movement, a literary and artistic rebellion against the rationalist ideals of the Enlightenment. This movement, which flourished in Germany in the late 18th century, emphasized intense emotion, individualism, and the power of nature. Goethe became one of its leading voices, using his works to challenge traditional literary forms and explore the depths of human passion and existential struggle. His early literary career was marked by a combination of personal experiences, intellectual influences, and a desire to break free from classical constraints. One of Goethe's first major works was Goethe von Berlichingen, 1773, a historical drama that embodied the rebellious spirit of Sturm und Drang. The play, based on the life of a 16th-century knight who defied imperial authority, presented a heroic yet flawed protagonist caught between personal honor and societal expectations. Unlike the rigid classical dramas of the Enlightenment, Goethe's Goethe featured rapid shifts in scene, emotionally charged dialogue, and a rejection of aristocratic refinement. The play was an immediate success and signaled Goethe's arrival as a powerful new literary voice. Its themes of personal freedom and resistance to authority resonated deeply with audiences who were increasingly questioning social hierarchies. However, it was the sorrows of young Werther, 1774, that truly catapulted Goethe to international fame. This novel, written in an epistolary format, tells the tragic story of Werther, a young man who falls in love with Charlotte, an unattainable woman, and ultimately takes his own life out of despair. The novel captured the essence of Sturm und Drang by portraying raw and unfiltered emotion, particularly in its depiction of unrequited love and existential suffering. Werther became a cultural phenomenon, inspiring what became known as Werther fever across Europe. Young men dressed like Werther, quoting passages from the book, and even imitating his tragic fate. The impact of Werther was both literary and social. On one hand, it revolutionized European literature by demonstrating the power of personal expression and emotional depth in storytelling. On the other hand, its portrayal of suicide and melancholy raised moral concerns among critics, some of whom worried that the book was encouraging self-destructive behavior. Goethe himself grew uneasy with the novel's overwhelming reception and later distanced himself from the Sturm und Drang movement. However, the novel's legacy endured, influencing writers such as Lord Byron and Mary Shelley, and establishing Goethe as one of the most significant literary figures of his time. The themes explored in Werther reflected Goethe's own personal experiences and emotional turmoil. His unfulfilled love for Charlotte Buff, a woman engaged to another man, provided the real-life inspiration for the novel. This blending of autobiography and fiction became a hallmark of his literary style, allowing him to engage deeply with universal human emotions while drawing from personal struggles. His ability to translate personal suffering into profound artistic expression is one of the reasons his works remain timeless. While Werther dominated the literary scene, Goethe continued to experiment with different genres and styles. He wrote poems, plays, and essays that explored themes of nature, individualism, and the conflict between passion and reason. His poetry, in particular, showcased his ability to merge lyrical beauty with philosophical depth. Works such as Prometheus and Wanderer's Night Song reflected both his admiration for classical mythology and his evolving spiritual beliefs. Prometheus, a bold and defiant poem, criticized the gods and celebrated human creativity, reflecting Goethe's growing fascination with self-determination and artistic independence. Despite his association with Sturm und Drang, Goethe gradually began to move beyond its emotional extremes. His intellectual encounters with figures such as Johann Gottfried Herder and his travels to Weimar exposed him to new artistic and philosophical perspectives. He started to recognize the limitations of excessive emotionalism and sought a more balanced approach to literature and life. His departure from Sturm und Drang was not an outright rejection, but rather a natural evolution toward a more refined artistic vision. Goethe's literary achievements during this period also drew the attention of the Duke of Saxe-Weimar, Karl August, who invited him to Weimar in 1775. This marked a turning point in Goethe's career, as he transitioned from a rebellious literary icon to a respected statesman and intellectual. His move to Weimar opened new opportunities for artistic and scientific exploration, laying the groundwork for his later masterpieces. While he continued to write poetry and drama, his role as a political and cultural leader expanded his intellectual horizons beyond the emotional intensity of Sturm und Drang. Although Goethe eventually distanced himself from Sturm und Drang, the movement left a lasting impact on his literary philosophy. It allowed him to explore the depths of human emotion, challenge literary conventions, and develop a unique artistic voice. Even in his later works, traces of Sturm und Drang can be found, particularly in his portrayal of passionate characters and existential dilemmas. The movement, though short-lived, played a crucial role in shaping German Romanticism and modern literature, with Goethe as its most enduring figure. Goethe's early literary career was defined by a constant search for artistic truth. His works from this period reflected a young writer grappling with intense emotions, philosophical inquiries, and societal constraints. Though his style evolved over time, the core themes of love, ambition, and the struggle for meaning remained central to his work. The next phase of his life, his time in Weimar, would further refine his artistic vision and establish him as one of the leading figures of European intellectual history. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's arrival in Weimar in 1775 marked a significant transition in both his personal life and his intellectual development. Invited by Duke Karl August of Saxe-Weimar, Goethe accepted a position at the young duke's court, setting aside his identity as a rebellious literary figure in favor of a more structured role as a statesman and advisor. This period in Weimar would last for the remainder of his life, shaping his literary output, philosophical outlook, and scientific pursuits. Although Goethe's early years in Weimar distanced him from the intense emotionalism of Sturm und Drang, they provided him with the stability and resources necessary for his intellectual maturation. Weimar, though a relatively small duchy, was a center of cultural and political activity in late 18th century Germany. Duke Karl August, recognizing Goethe's talents, quickly entrusted him with various governmental responsibilities. Within a short period, Goethe was appointed to important administrative roles, including overseeing mining operations, road construction, and financial reforms. His keen organizational skills and methodical approach to governance helped improve the duchy's infrastructure and economic stability. These responsibilities, while time-consuming, provided Goethe with invaluable experience in practical affairs, reinforcing his belief in the connection between intellectual pursuits and real-world application. One of Goethe's most significant contributions to Weimar's political landscape was his work on legal and administrative reforms. He was instrumental in modernizing Weimar's bureaucracy, advocating for greater efficiency and justice in governance. His efforts included restructuring the legal system to make it more accessible and fair, particularly for the lower classes. These reforms reflected his Enlightenment-inspired belief in rational governance, where law and order should serve the welfare of the people rather than merely uphold aristocratic privilege. While Goethe was not a radical reformer, his policies demonstrated his commitment to pragmatic and humane governance. Despite his growing political responsibilities, Goethe did not abandon his artistic and literary interests. Weimar provided him with an environment where he could engage in intellectual discourse with other prominent figures of the time. His relationship with Charlotte von Stein, a noblewoman and confidant, played a crucial role in his personal and creative life. Charlotte, known for her intellect and refined sensibility, influenced Goethe's shift toward a more restrained and introspective literary style. Their correspondence, filled with philosophical reflections and personal confessions, reveals Goethe's evolving thoughts on love, duty, and artistic expression. During this period, Goethe also deepened his engagement with classical antiquity. His exposure to Greek and Roman literature, coupled with his administrative experience, led him to appreciate order, harmony, and self-discipline, qualities that would define his later literary works. This intellectual transformation distanced him from the unrestrained emotionalism of his youth and brought him closer to the ideals of Weimar classicism, a movement that emphasized balance, reason, and aesthetic perfection. Goethe's commitment to classical ideals would later be solidified during his travels to Italy, which profoundly influenced his artistic philosophy. Although Goethe initially embraced his political duties, over time, he began to feel constrained by them. The pressures of administration and court life left little room for creative pursuits, leading him to question whether his talents were best suited for politics or literature. This internal conflict reached a turning point in 1786, when Goethe made the bold decision to leave Weimar and embark on a journey to Italy. Without informing the Duke or his colleagues, he set off on what would become one of the most transformative experiences of his life. His travels through Italy allowed him to immerse himself in classical art and architecture, reinforcing his belief in the ideals of beauty and artistic discipline. While Goethe's departure was unexpected, Duke Karl August did not sever ties with him. Instead, upon his return to Weimar in 1788, Goethe was welcomed back with greater respect and a renewed sense of independence. Although he continued to serve in various official capacities, his political duties were reduced, allowing him more time to focus on literature and scientific studies. This period marked a new phase in Goethe's career, where he balanced his role as a statesman with his artistic ambitions. His experience in Italy had provided him with a fresh perspective, leading to the refinement of his literary style and philosophical outlook. One of the most significant outcomes of Goethe's return to Weimar was the beginning of his collaboration with Friedrich Schiller. Though the two had initially been rivals, their relationship evolved into one of the most fruitful intellectual partnerships in literary history. Together, they shaped the Weimar classical movement, advocating for a literature that combined artistic excellence with moral and philosophical depth. Their correspondence and joint projects enriched German literature, producing works that remain influential to this day. Schiller's emphasis on the idealistic and Goethe's focus on the organic and natural complemented each other, creating a synthesis of thought that defined an era. Goethe's political career ultimately provided him with the discipline and perspective necessary for his literary achievements. His engagement with governance, law, and administration reinforced his appreciation for order and structure, themes that became central to his later works. Although his early years in Weimar had diverted him from literature, they had also deepened his understanding of human nature, society, and the responsibilities of leadership. This practical knowledge would later manifest in works such as Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, which explores themes of personal growth, social roles, and the search for meaning. Goethe's years in Weimar were a period of transition and growth. His involvement in political affairs broadened his intellectual scope, while his exposure to classical ideals refined his artistic vision. The stability of court life allowed him to cultivate relationships that shaped his literary development, particularly his bond with Charlotte von Stein and his partnership with Schiller. Although he struggled with the demands of administration, his experiences in Weimar enriched his worldview, preparing him for the next phase of his artistic and intellectual journey. His eventual return to literature, informed by his political and philosophical insights, would lead to some of his most enduring works. Goethe's decision to leave Weimar in 1786 and embark on his Italian journey marked a defining moment in his intellectual and artistic development. By this point, he had grown restless with court life, burdened by administrative duties that left little room for creative exploration. His dissatisfaction, coupled with an intense desire to experience the artistic and cultural heritage of antiquity, led him to undertake what would become one of the most transformative experiences of his life. His travels through Italy not only deepened his appreciation for classical art, but also solidified his commitment to a more disciplined and harmonious literary style, which would later define Weimar classicism. Goethe's journey, which lasted nearly 2 years, took him through various Italian cities, including Verona, Venice, Rome, Naples, and Sicily. From the moment he arrived in Italy, he was captivated by its artistic richness and historical depth. The ruins of ancient Rome, the grandeur of Renaissance architecture, and the vibrant life of the Italian people left a profound impression on him. He saw in Italy the realization of aesthetic ideals he had long sought: beauty, order, and balance, which contrasted sharply with the unrestrained emotionalism of his earlier Sturm und Drang period. Rome, in particular, became the focal point of Goethe's intellectual awakening. Immersing himself in the city's classical heritage, he studied ancient sculptures, attended art lectures, and engaged in discussions with artists and scholars. He was particularly drawn to the works of Raphael and Michelangelo, whose mastery of form and composition epitomized the principles of artistic perfection he aspired to achieve. This exposure to classical ideals reinforced Goethe's belief in the need for discipline and structure in artistic creation, a perspective that would guide his future literary endeavors. During his time in Italy, Goethe also sought to refine his skills as a visual artist. He spent considerable time sketching landscapes, studying human anatomy, and analyzing the techniques of Renaissance painters. Although he ultimately recognized that his true calling lay in literature rather than visual art, this period of artistic practice deepened his understanding of proportion, symmetry, and composition, concepts that he would later apply to his literary works. His efforts to master classical artistic techniques mirrored his broader quest for intellectual and aesthetic refinement. The influence of Italian culture extended beyond the visual arts. Goethe was deeply inspired by the vitality and spontaneity of Italian life. which he contrasted with the rigid social structures of Germany. The warmth and expressiveness of the Italian people fascinated him, providing him with new perspectives on human nature and society. His observations of Italian customs, traditions, and daily interactions enriched his literary imagination, allowing him to infuse his later works with a greater sense of realism and human complexity. One of the most significant outcomes of Goethe's Italian journey was his decision to revise and complete Iphigenia in Taurus, a play that exemplified his shift toward classical ideals. Originally written during his Sturm und Drang phase, the play underwent substantial modifications in Italy, reflecting Goethe's newfound appreciation for harmony and rationality. The final version of Iphigenia embodies the principles of Weimar classicism, emphasizing moral integrity, human dignity, and the triumph of reason over passion. This transformation marked Goethe's departure from his earlier literary style and his embrace of a more refined, balanced approach to storytelling. Beyond literature and art, Goethe's time in Italy also deepened his interest in scientific inquiry. Fascinated by the natural landscapes of Italy, he studied geology, botany, and anatomy, making detailed observations that would later contribute to his scientific writings. His exploration of plant morphology led him to develop his theory of the Erbpflanze, primordial plant, an early attempt to understand the unity and transformation of living organisms. This interdisciplinary approach, blending scientific investigation with artistic sensitivity, became a defining feature of Goethe's intellectual legacy. Despite his profound admiration for Italy, Goethe eventually realized that he could not remain there indefinitely. By 1788, he felt a growing sense of responsibility toward Weimar and the intellectual community he had left behind. His time in Italy had provided him with the clarity and inspiration he had sought, but he understood that his artistic mission could only be fully realized through engagement with German cultural life. With a renewed sense of purpose, he returned to Weimar, ready to apply the lessons he had learned to his literary and intellectual pursuits. Goethe's Italian journey not only reshaped his artistic vision, but also influenced the broader landscape of German literature. His emphasis on classical ideals, combined with his commitment to intellectual rigor, helped define Weimar classicism, a movement that sought to integrate artistic beauty with moral and philosophical depth. Alongside Schiller, he worked to elevate German literature to new heights, advocating for a literature that was both aesthetically refined and intellectually enriching. His experiences in Italy provided the foundation for some of his most celebrated works, including Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, Hermann and Dorothea, and later, Faust. Goethe's Italian journey was a transformative period that marked his transition from a passionate, emotional writer to a disciplined, classical thinker. His exposure to ancient and Renaissance art, his deep engagement with scientific inquiry, and his immersion in Italian culture shaped the intellectual foundation of his later works. By embracing the ideals of balance, order, and artistic perfection, Goethe emerged from this journey with a renewed vision, one that would define not only his own literary achievements, but also the development of German and European cultural history. Upon his return from Italy in 1788, Goethe found himself reintegrating into the cultural and intellectual life of Weimar with a renewed sense of purpose. His exposure to classical art and philosophy had profoundly transformed his artistic ideals, but he now faced the challenge of translating those ideals into a distinctly German literary tradition. This period of his life was defined by his collaboration with Friedrich Schiller, a partnership that would elevate German literature to new heights and give birth to the movement known as Weimar classicism. At first, the relationship between Goethe and Schiller was marked by a degree of mutual skepticism. Schiller, best known at the time for his historical dramas and his passionate, rebellious spirit, had initially viewed Goethe as a writer who had abandoned the revolutionary fervor of Sturm und Drang in favor of aristocratic refinement. Goethe, in turn, regarded Schiller's early works as overly emotional and lacking the harmony and discipline he had come to admire in classical art. However, as they engaged in deeper discussions about literature, philosophy, and aesthetics, they discovered a shared vision for the future of German literature. One of the key aspects of their intellectual collaboration was their joint commitment to elevating literature beyond personal expression and emotional turmoil. They believed that art should serve a higher moral and philosophical purpose, fostering self-improvement and intellectual enlightenment. This perspective stood in contrast to the Romantic movement, which emphasized subjectivity, mysticism, and the exploration of the unconscious mind. Instead, Goethe and Schiller sought to create works that embodied clarity, reason, and universal truth, qualities they saw exemplified in ancient Greek and Roman art. A crucial moment in their collaboration came in the form of their correspondence, which spanned several years and covered a wide range of topics, from aesthetics and ethics to natural philosophy. In these letters, they refined their theories of art and human nature, shaping what would become the core principles of Weimar classicism. They agreed that true artistic beauty lay in the balance between form and content, passion and restraint, individuality and universality. Their discussions culminated in the idea that great art should reflect an idealized version of humanity, elevating both the creator and the audience toward a higher state of being. This shared philosophy found expression in their literary works. Schiller, inspired by Goethe's classical vision, reworked his dramatic style to align more closely with classical principles. His plays Wallenstein, 1799, Maria Stuart, 1800, and Wilhelm Tell, 1804, displayed a newfound emphasis on structure, character development, and philosophical depth. Similarly, Goethe's later works, including Hermann and Dorothea, 1797, and his revisions to Faust, reflected a synthesis of classical harmony and German intellectualism. Through their respective contributions, they established a model for a literature that was both aesthetically refined and deeply philosophical. Beyond their individual writings, Goethe and Schiller played an active role in shaping the cultural life of Weimar. They collaborated on literary journals such as Die Horen, which aimed to promote classical ideals and engage the German public in intellectual discourse. They also worked to elevate the German stage, transforming the Weimar court theater into a center for serious dramatic art. Under their influence, Weimar became a hub of cultural and artistic excellence, attracting scholars, poets, and thinkers from across Europe. One of the defining characteristics of Weimar classicism was its belief in the concept of the Bildungsideal, the ideal of self-cultivation and moral development through art and education. Goethe and Schiller saw literature not merely as entertainment, but as a means of shaping character and fostering a more enlightened society. Their vision extended beyond aesthetics to encompass ethical and philosophical concerns, advocating for a literature that encouraged self-reflection and the pursuit of higher ideals. However, their partnership was not without its challenges. While they shared many artistic and philosophical beliefs, they also had fundamental differences in temperament and worldview. Goethe, with his deep interest in nature and scientific inquiry, tended to emphasize organic growth and the interconnectedness of all things. Schiller, on the other hand, was more drawn to idealism and the notion of human transcendence. These differences, rather than creating division, enriched their collaboration as they pushed each other to refine their perspectives and expand their intellectual horizons. Tragically, their partnership was cut short by Schiller's untimely death in 1805. His passing was a profound loss for Goethe, who had come to regard Schiller not only as a collaborator, but as a true intellectual companion. In the years that followed, Goethe continued to develop the ideas they had explored together, but he often lamented the absence of the rigorous dialogue they had shared. Schiller's influence remained evident in Goethe's later works, particularly in his continued pursuit of artistic and philosophical synthesis. The collaboration between Goethe and Schiller was one of the most significant intellectual partnerships in literary history. Their shared commitment to classical ideals and their efforts to elevate German literature laid the foundation for Weimar classicism, a movement that sought to integrate artistic beauty with moral and intellectual depth. Through their works, their correspondence, and their contributions to Weimar's cultural life, They established a model of literature that continues to inspire generations of writers and thinkers. Their legacy endures as a testament to the power of artistic collaboration and the pursuit of timeless ideals. While Johann Wolfgang von Goethe is primarily celebrated for his literary achievements, his scientific pursuits represent an equally significant aspect of his intellectual legacy. Throughout his life, Goethe sought to understand the natural world with the same depth and creativity that characterized his literary works. His scientific inquiries spanned multiple disciplines, including botany, optics, anatomy, and geology, reflecting his belief in the interconnectedness of all forms of knowledge. Though his scientific theories often diverged from mainstream scientific thought, his approach to nature and his emphasis on observation and intuition left a lasting impact on the philosophy of science. One of Goethe's most ambitious scientific endeavors was his study of plant morphology. His travels through Italy had exposed him to a wide variety of plant life, inspiring him to develop a unifying theory of plant evolution. In his Metamorphosis of Plants, 1790, he proposed that all plants derive from a fundamental archetype, which he called the Erbpflanze, or primordial plant. According to Goethe, the different forms observed in plant structures, leaves, petals, stems, were variations of a single underlying principle, transformed by environmental influences and growth processes. Though his ideas were later overshadowed by Darwinian evolutionary theory, they anticipated modern discussions on developmental biology and structural homology in plants. In addition to botany, Goethe made significant contributions to the study of color and optics. His theory of colors, 1810, was his most extensive scientific work and sought to challenge the Newtonian understanding of light. Whereas Newton had demonstrated that white light could be separated into a spectrum of colors through a prism, Goethe approached the study of color from a phenomenological perspective. He argued that colors arise from the interplay of light and darkness, and he emphasized the subjective experience of color perception. His work, though dismissed by many physicists at the time, influenced later thinkers, particularly in the fields of art, psychology, and philosophy. Figures such as Arthur Schopenhauer and Rudolf Steiner drew upon Goethe's color theory to explore the psychological and symbolic significance of colors. Goethe's interest in anatomy led to another important discovery: the existence of the intermaxillary bone in humans. While studying comparative anatomy, he noticed that human skulls contained a small bone that was also present in other mammals but had previously been overlooked in human anatomy. His identification of the intermaxillary bone helped confirm the idea that humans and animals share fundamental anatomical structures, supporting early discussions on evolutionary continuity. Although Goethe did not pursue the implications of this discovery in the way later scientists such as Darwin would, his findings demonstrated his keen observational skills and his ability to challenge established scientific assumptions. Beyond these specific discoveries, Goethe's broader scientific philosophy set him apart from the empirical methodologies that were becoming dominant in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who emphasized quantitative analysis and reductionism, Goethe advocated for a holistic and qualitative approach to nature. He believed that scientific inquiry should not merely dissect and measure natural phenomena, but should also seek to understand their dynamic processes and inherent unity. This perspective aligned with his broader philosophical views, which emphasized organic growth, transformation, and the interdependence of all things. Goethe's approach to science was deeply influenced by his literary and artistic background. He saw nature as a living, creative force, much like the artistic imagination. His scientific writings often contain poetic descriptions and philosophical reflections, demonstrating his belief that science and art were not opposing disciplines, but complementary ways of understanding reality. This idea of nature philosophy, which sought to merge scientific and philosophical inquiry, found resonance among German Romantic thinkers, who admired Goethe's rejection of mechanistic explanations in favor of a more holistic view of life and nature. Despite his deep engagement with scientific research, Goethe's work was met with skepticism by many professional scientists of his time. His rejection of Newtonian optics, in particular, positioned him at odds with the dominant scientific paradigm. However, Goethe remained steadfast in his convictions, arguing that his approach was not meant to replace empirical science, but to offer a more intuitive and human-centered perspective on nature. His emphasis on direct experience and careful observation made his work influential among later thinkers, particularly in fields such as phenomenology and ecological science. Goethe's scientific pursuits also played a crucial role in shaping his literary works. His fascination with transformation and organic development is evident in Faust, where the protagonist's quest for knowledge mirrors Goethe's own intellectual journey. Similarly, his botanical studies influenced the themes of growth and change in Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. By integrating scientific concepts into his literature, Goethe demonstrated his belief in the unity of knowledge, an idea that challenged the increasing specialization of academic disciplines. Another important aspect of Goethe's scientific legacy is his contribution to environmental thought. His reverence for nature and his holistic understanding of ecosystems foreshadowed modern ecological awareness. He recognized the delicate balance of natural systems and warned against the dangers of human interference, an idea that resonates strongly in contemporary discussions on sustainability and environmental ethics. His view of nature as a dynamic, interconnected whole laid the groundwork for later ecological and systems-based approaches to science. Goethe's scientific pursuits, though often overshadowed by his literary achievements, were an essential part of his intellectual legacy. His studies in botany, optics, anatomy, and geology reflected his belief in the unity of all knowledge and his commitment to a holistic understanding of nature. While many of his theories were not fully embraced by the scientific community, his approach to science, characterized by careful observation, intuitive insight, and philosophical depth, continues to inspire scholars and thinkers across disciplines. His work serves as a reminder that literature, philosophy, and science need not be separate domains, but can instead inform and enrich one another in the search for deeper truths about the world. Among Goethe's vast literary achievements, Faust stands as his magnum opus, a work that encapsulates his lifelong philosophical inquiries, artistic evolution, and profound engagement with human nature. The play, composed over the span of 6 decades, is more than just a dramatic retelling of the old German legend of Dr. Faustus. It is a monumental reflection on the human condition, the pursuit of knowledge, and the complexities of moral choice. Through the character of Faust, Goethe presents an archetypal figure whose insatiable curiosity and unrelenting ambition mirror the intellectual and existential struggles of humankind. The origins of Faust can be traced back to the late 1770s when Goethe first became fascinated with the legend of the historical Johann Georg Faust, a wandering scholar and alchemist rumored to have made a pact with the devil. The tale, which had been widely circulated in German folklore and literature, provided Goethe with the foundation for his own philosophical exploration of human striving. However, unlike previous versions that portrayed Faust as a mere sinner doomed to eternal damnation, Goethe sought to reimagine him as a deeply complex individual whose relentless search for meaning ultimately leads to spiritual redemption. The first version of the play, known as Faust, was written in the early 1770s but remained unpublished until long after Goethe's death. It contained many of the key elements that would later define the Faust narrative, including the themes of intellectual dissatisfaction, the seduction of Gretchen, and the presence of Mephistopheles, the cunning demon who serves as Faust's guide through the pleasures and dangers of the world. However, it was not until the early 1800s that Goethe fully committed himself to transforming Faust into a complete and philosophically rich drama. In 1808, Goethe published Faust, Part 1, which became an immediate literary milestone. This first part of the drama focuses on Faust's pact with Mephistopheles, his pursuit of pleasure and worldly experience, and his tragic love affair with Gretchen. Faust, disillusioned with traditional knowledge and weary of academic study, seeks a more profound and direct engagement with life. His agreement with Mephistopheles, selling his soul in exchange for unlimited experience and fulfillment. Sets him on a journey that is as much about external adventure as it is about internal conflict. Gretchen's story, a central subplot in Faust. Part 1 serves as a powerful exploration of innocence, temptation, and social hypocrisy. The relationship between Faust and Gretchen, initially tender and romantic, descends into a tragic narrative of seduction, abandonment, and moral downfall. Goethe's portrayal of Gretchen's suffering, particularly her fate as a fallen woman condemned by society, reflects his deep concern with themes of justice, redemption, and personal responsibility. Her ultimate salvation, despite her tragic end, stands in contrast to the conventional morality of the time, suggesting Goethe's belief in a higher, more compassionate form of judgment. While Faust, Part 1 focuses on personal passion and the consequences of individual choices. Faust. Part 2, published in 1832 shortly before Goethe's death, expands the play's philosophical scope to encompass broader themes of civilization, progress, and humanity's role in shaping the world. Unlike the intimate and tragic tone of the first part, the second part of Faust is more allegorical and grand in scale. Faust moves beyond personal pleasure and embarks on ambitious endeavors, including political power, artistic creation, and even utopian aspirations of building a perfect society. Throughout Faust, Part 2, Goethe engages with contemporary debates on science, economics, imperialism, and the role of human ambition in shaping history. The character of Faust evolves from a disillusioned scholar to a visionary striving for the betterment of humanity, even as he remains entangled in moral and ethical dilemmas. His final moments, in which he envisions a world of harmony and collective progress, ultimately lead to his salvation. A striking departure from the traditional Faustian legend in which the protagonist is doomed to eternal damnation. One of Goethe's most innovative contributions to the Faust legend was his portrayal of Mephistopheles. Unlike the purely malevolent devil of earlier versions, Goethe's Mephistopheles is a witty, ironic, and often amusing figure who represents not just evil, but also the forces of skepticism, destruction, and human limitation. He serves as both a tempter and a challenger, constantly testing Faust's ideals and ambitions. In doing so, Mephistopheles embodies Goethe's understanding of duality, the necessity of both creative and destructive forces in the unfolding of human destiny. The philosophical depth of Faust extends beyond its narrative, encompassing a vast array of intellectual traditions, from classical mythology to German idealism. Goethe weaves together elements of Renaissance humanism, Enlightenment rationalism, and Romantic individualism, creating a work that defies simple categorization. The play's engagement with metaphysical questions, such as the nature of free will, the limits of human knowledge, and the search for transcendence, ensures its continued relevance in discussions of philosophy and literature. Faust is not merely a play, but a vast intellectual and artistic achievement that encapsulates Goethe's lifelong quest for understanding. Through Faust's journey, Goethe explores the tension between human ambition and ethical responsibility, the pursuit of knowledge and the limitations of human existence. The play remains one of the most profound examinations of the human condition ever written, offering insights that continue to inspire readers, scholars, and artists to this day. As Goethe's final and most comprehensive literary statement, Faust stands as a testament to his enduring vision of humanity's endless striving for meaning and self-realization. As Goethe entered the final phase of his life, he was widely recognized as one of the greatest literary and intellectual figures in Europe. His influence had extended far beyond Germany, shaping the literary, philosophical, and scientific discourse of the 19th century. Though much of his most significant work had already been completed, his later years were marked by continued reflection, refinement of his ideas, and engagement with a younger generation of thinkers and writers. His legacy, firmly established during his lifetime, would only grow after his death, making him a towering figure in world literature. During his last decades, Goethe lived primarily in Weimar, where he maintained a highly structured daily routine devoted to study, writing, and scientific inquiry. Despite his advancing age, he remained intellectually active, producing revisions of earlier works, continuing his scientific investigations, and maintaining extensive correspondences with scholars, poets, and politicians. He was particularly engaged with the completion of Faust, Part 2, which occupied much of his final years and served as a culmination of his artistic and philosophical development. A key aspect of Goethe's later life was his relationship with younger intellectuals and writers, many of whom saw him as both an inspiration and a formidable presence. The rise of Romanticism, with its emphasis on emotional intensity, individualism, and mysticism, presented a stark contrast to Goethe's classical ideals. While he had played a crucial role in the early Sturm und Drang movement, his later works embraced a more measured and universal approach to literature. As Romanticism flourished in Germany and across Europe, Goethe remained skeptical of its excesses, often preferring the balance and order of classical traditions. Nevertheless, Goethe maintained an interest in contemporary literary and cultural developments. One of the most notable influences on his later thinking was his exposure to world literature, Weltliteratur, a concept he championed as a means of fostering cross-cultural exchange and intellectual dialogue. He believed that literature should transcend national boundaries and that the greatest works spoke to universal human experiences. His engagement with Persian poetry, particularly the works of Hafez, led to the creation of his West Eastern Divan, 1819, a collection of poems that reflected his admiration for Eastern literary traditions and his vision of a shared global literary heritage. Goethe's final years were also marked by profound personal losses, including the deaths of his close friend and collaborator Friedrich Schiller in 1805 and his wife, Christiane Vulpius, in 1816. These losses, along with the inevitable solitude that came with old age, contributed to an increasing sense of introspection in his later writings. Yet, rather than retreating from public life, Goethe continued to refine his thoughts on art, science, and human existence, producing essays, autobiographical reflections, and literary revisions. His conversations with Eckermann, compiled from discussions with his close associate Johann Peter Eckermann, offer invaluable insights into his intellectual world and serve as one of the most important records of his thoughts on literature, philosophy, and science. One of the defining characteristics of Goethe's later work was his deepening understanding of time and historical progress. He viewed his own life and literary career as part of a larger continuum of human thought and creativity. His autobiography, Dichtung und Wahrheit, Poetry and Truth, published in several volumes between 1811 and 1833, presents not just a personal narrative but also a meditation on the cultural and intellectual transformations of his time. Through this work, Goethe sought to reconcile personal experience with broader historical forces, offering a unique perspective on the evolution of literature and thought. Despite his declining health, Goethe remained engaged with the world until his final days. He closely followed political events in Europe, particularly the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars and the shifting landscape of German politics. While he had once been sympathetic to revolutionary ideals, his later years saw a more conservative outlook, favoring stability and cultural development over radical change. This evolution in his thinking reflected his lifelong commitment to balance and harmony, both in art and in society. On March 22, 1832, Goethe passed away at the age of 82 in Weimar. His final words, reportedly mehr Licht, more light, have been the subject of much speculation, interpreted as both a literal request and a symbolic statement on the pursuit of knowledge and enlightenment. With his death, Germany lost one of its greatest literary and intellectual figures, but his influence was only beginning to reach its full extent. His works, spanning poetry, drama, prose, and scientific writings, would continue to shape the course of literature and philosophy for generations to come. Goethe's literary legacy is unparalleled in its scope and depth. As a poet, he shaped the German language with his lyricism and emotional intensity. As a dramatist, he transformed the theatrical tradition with Faust, which remains one of the most profound explorations of human ambition ever written. As a novelist, he redefined the Bildungsroman, influencing countless works that followed. And as a thinker, he bridged literature, philosophy, and science in ways that few before or after him have achieved. His impact on figures such as Nietzsche, Thomas Mann, and Hermann Hesse attest to his enduring significance. Goethe's final years were a period of reflection, refinement, and continued intellectual engagement. Though he had already achieved greatness, he remained dedicated to his craft and to the pursuit of knowledge until the very end. His influence, far from fading with his passing, continued to grow, shaping the development of literature, philosophy, and science well into the modern era. As a writer who sought to understand the full spectrum of human experience, Goethe left behind a body of work that remains one of the most significant contributions to world literature, ensuring his place as one of history's greatest minds. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's literary, philosophical, and scientific contributions have had a profound and lasting impact on Western thought and culture. His work not only revolutionized the German literary tradition, but also played a key role in shaping the intellectual currents of the 19th and 20th centuries. From his exploration of human ambition in Faust to his scientific inquiries, Goethe's influence permeates a wide array of disciplines, from literature and philosophy to the natural sciences. As one of the most celebrated and influential figures in world history, Goethe's legacy continues to resonate today. At the heart of Goethe's enduring legacy is his literary mastery, particularly in his poetry, drama, and novels. As a poet, Goethe transformed the German literary landscape, moving it away from the rigid structures of classical and Enlightenment poetry toward a more expressive, individualistic form. His early works, such as The Sorrows of Young Werther, 1774, which captured the emotional intensity of the Romantic movement, introduced a new model for the expression of personal feelings and subjective experience. Through his poetry, Goethe explored themes of love, nature, the self, and the passage of time, creating a vast and varied body of work that continues to influence poets worldwide. Goethe's dramatic works, most notably Faust, represent the pinnacle of his literary achievement. Faust's exploration of ambition, knowledge, morality, and redemption has solidified its place as one of the greatest works of world literature. Goethe's handling of complex themes, such as the duality of human nature, the pursuit of transcendence, and the reconciliation of individual desires with social responsibility, makes Faust not just a story of personal struggle, but a timeless allegory for the human condition. The play's structure, which blends tragedy, comedy, and philosophy, and its integration of classical and modern elements, influenced generations of playwrights, poets, and philosophers. Goethe's influence on the genre of the Bildungsroman, or coming-of-age novel, is equally significant. Works such as Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, 1795 to 1796, established the genre as a central component of European literature. In these works, Goethe explored the development of the individual in relation to society, emphasizing the importance of personal growth and self-discovery. His treatment of the Bildungsroman set the stage for later novels by authors such as Charles Dickens, Thomas Mann, and Hermann Hesse, who continued to explore similar themes of individual development, self-realization, and the tension between personal desires and societal expectations. Goethe's impact on philosophy is equally profound, particularly in relation to German idealism and Romanticism. His work was a significant influence on thinkers like Friedrich Schiller, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, and Friedrich Nietzsche. Goethe's philosophical approach, often described as a synthesis of empiricism and idealism, emphasized the importance of experience, intuition, and creativity in the quest for knowledge. His writings on aesthetics, nature, and the human soul offered a counterpoint to the rationalism of the Enlightenment, influencing subsequent philosophical thought on the nature of reality, perception, and the limits of human knowledge. In particular, Goethe's understanding of the dialectical relationship between opposites, such as light and dark, good and evil, or creation and destruction, resonates deeply in the philosophy of Nietzsche, who admired Goethe's ability to reconcile seemingly contradictory forces within the human experience. Nietzsche's notion of the Übermensch, Overman, and his concept of eternal recurrence can be seen as extensions of the tension and striving that Goethe so vividly portrayed in Faust. Through Nietzsche, Goethe's influence spread further into existentialism and 20th century philosophical thought. Goethe's scientific work, particularly his contributions to the fields of color theory, botany, and morphology, also left a lasting imprint on modern science. Though many of his theories were later superseded by advancements in physics and biology, his holistic approach to science, a synthesis of observation, intuition, and artistic insight, has inspired contemporary ecological and systems thinking. Goethe's belief in the interconnectedness of nature and the importance of the human experience in understanding the world laid the foundation for later ecological movements that emphasized the interconnectedness of life and the need for sustainable living practices. Goethe's fascination with the natural world extended to his environmental philosophy, which is increasingly relevant in the context of today's ecological crises. His reflections on nature, often imbued with a sense of awe and reverence, contributed to a deep appreciation for the complexity and beauty of the natural world. Goethe's ideas continue to influence environmental thinkers, ecologists, and even artists who seek to draw connections between humanity and the earth, advocating for a more harmonious relationship between human beings and their environment. In the arts, Goethe's legacy is perhaps most powerfully felt in the realm of music and visual art. His works have inspired composers such as Franz Schubert, Robert Schumann, and Richard Wagner, who drew upon Goethe's poetry and plays in their compositions. The emotional depth and intellectual complexity of Goethe's work resonated deeply with the Romantic composers, who sought to express the inner workings of the human soul through music. In the visual arts, Goethe's theories on color were particularly influential, inspiring artists such as J.M.W. Turner and Vasily Kandinsky, who sought to explore the emotional and symbolic potential of color in their work. Goethe's impact on world literature is also evident in the continued global interest in his work. His writings have been translated into nearly every language, and his works continue to be studied, analyzed, and appreciated in academic settings around the world. His exploration of universal themes such as love, ambition, identity, and the search for meaning transcends cultural and temporal boundaries, ensuring that his work remains relevant to readers of all generations. His ability to blend the personal with the universal, the philosophical with the poetic, has secured his place as a writer whose influence stretches far beyond the confines of his own time and place. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's legacy is one of remarkable breadth and depth, touching virtually every corner of intellectual and cultural life. His contributions to literature, philosophy, and science have left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the course of Western thought and continuing to inspire generations of thinkers, writers, and artists. Whether through the haunting tragedy of Faust, the introspective exploration of human development in Wilhelm Meister, or his profound insights into nature and color, Goethe's work speaks to the enduring quest for knowledge, self-understanding, and transcendence. As a polymath whose intellectual pursuits span diverse fields, Goethe remains a symbol of the power of human creativity and the limitless potential of the human spirit.